Welcome back to the Budburst podcast. Thank you all for joining. Today we've got an amazing guest, an amazing leader, and a great human being. Someone I'm proud to say is also a good friend. Elena Hutchison's joining us. Many years at Medallia, saw lots and lots of different chapters of that organization. She's going to talk to us about her journey, both personally and professionally. If you've listened to our podcast before, you know we try to take a very personal tact and uncover not just what folks have achieved professionally, but who they are, what made them the people they've become, and some of those defining moments in their career, and then pull out the nuggets where we can for our listeners, so that hopefully they can take some of those lessons with them in their journey. So Elena, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I saw that you guys had put this podcast out, and I raised my hand immediately, like, please bring me on there. And I'm gonna be a loyal fan as these come out. So yeah, thanks for having me on. I spent 10 years at Medallia, where kind of started there as one of the first sales engineers. I took on all kinds of sales engineering leadership types of roles. Eventually ended up running analyst relations, running product marketing, and eventually on the executive team as the chief strategy officer. And I left after it was like 10 and a half years. I said, it's a good amount of time at a single tech company. I'm going to take a break. So that's what I'm doing these days.
In that 10 years though, for our listeners, like I know this, but we should say, I think that was Series B through IPO, through private equity acquisition, and in the middle between those two, running as a public company for I don't know how many quarters, but
all of the things.
The whole thing.
What a cool run to be able to have seen. And you can stay at a company for 10 years when every 2 years it feels like a totally different company. And I think that was definitely my experience as we grew and as my roles grew, right? I went from individual contributor to people leader to global leader to e-team leader.
Elena, one of the things we noticed in looking at the analytics and talking to folks after the last podcast we did was that a lot of folks joined, maybe only had 15, 20 minutes, came back potentially and listened to kind of the long form later. So we want to maybe start today with a little bit of bottom line up front, right? A bluff. You and I spent quite a bit of time talking about your journey as we kind of prepared for this. Some themes emerged, right? And it's almost like two, I don't know, maybe acts in your play so far, and lots of chapters in between. But one where everything was about, hey, saying yes and taking on new challenges and doing the thing and leaning into new experiences, and then a later version where, as you especially became more and more senior, you had to start saying no. And, the tension kind of in between those two acts was real. Something that really struck me and I think maybe could be valuable for our listeners too. So you want to maybe highlight those two chapters for us, and then we'll back up from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that was a big mindset shift for me because, I think we'll talk a lot about this, but I spent my 20s and most of my 30s in this headspace of just say yes to everything, right? Say yes, I'll figure it out. Say yes to assignments I don't necessarily know how to do. Say yes to the extra hours after work. Say yes to that trip or that project or whatever. And I was up-leveling my skills that whole time, right? Learning new things, learning how to do new stuff, things that at the time I didn't realize would serve my later career. But even looking back in some of my most senior years at Medallia, I was using some of the market research skills or focus groups that I learned when I was 20 something. So, I think that era of yes served me really well. It led to me growing a ton in my 20s and my 30s. But I had to make this really hard pivot because when you are in that mindset of I'm the person who can get it done, my professional value is I'm the one who will do it, right? I can take on as many jobs and as many hours and as many whatever as you need. You start to burn out. And so that really happened to me. I was newer in the executive suite, kind of in my senior vice president, and then into my C-level or my E-team era. And I found that that orientation of, yes, my team will do everything. Yes, I will take on that new assignment. It was, number one, burning me out. It was making me less effective. It was making me feel like I wasn't a good mom. It was putting me in a position where I had to kind of let my kid sit in front of a tablet while I finished up the day's, the second job and third job of the day's work. It was also, and I'm a people leader at this point, and I realized that it was hurting my teams because, number one, it allows you as a leader to stay in this mindset of I've got to be the person, right? When somebody needs something from my part of the organization, I'm going to put myself forward as the solution to that. And that stunts the growth of your people, right? So that mindset shift of I don't need to be the person. In fact, I shouldn't be the person. In fact, if someone asks me to do something and I don't immediately think who else on my team can do this instead of me, I'm doing a disservice to the team. And so, and that's uncomfortable, right? Because your whole professional identity is I'm the yes person. I can do it. You can rely on me. But what I realized was, as you get into the era where you're a people leader and you're more senior, it's actually really destructive thing. And so I think there are kind of two chapters in my career. There's the yes era, and then there's the era where I figure out the power of no, right? The power of a well curated to-do list. And, and I think that really unlocked a lot for me as a leader.
Yeah, I love it. I think we talked about this with one of our previous guests, like making that pivot from, awesome IC to leader to then leader of leaders, and the skills required to do that well. It's said very differently, but I think a similar outcome is that, I think the way he talked about it, Brandon talked about it, was he had to realize that his first team was the executives, not the folks under him. I think an extension of that is if and when that's the case, then you have to stop becoming the one that's just doing everything. You've got to your point as well, edit that to-do list, right? You can't do everything. If you take on too many things, you won't do any of them well. One of the things we talked about in our prep was that the Peter principle, right? Like folks, many of us rise to a level at which we're kind of like over our heads. And I personally blame this. Like, I think there's a lot of folks that don't maybe realize that they've got to get to the point where they're comfortable saying, no, I can't do that. I won't be able to do it well. Or yes, I can do that, but that means something else has to come off of my plate for my team to do it well. It's a hard thing when, the things that got you here are not the things that will get you there.
I think that's spot on. I mean, for me, it was an identity thing, right? I was the yes person. Like, I was going to get stuff done. And I took a lot of pride in being the person who could move kind of unmovable mountains. But the reality is there's a point at which that starts to get in the way of your ability to really be the best version of the senior coaching, unlocking leaders version of yourself. And I hit that wall for a little bit too long before I got involved with a women's coaching group that really helped me challenge the assumption that the only way for me to be successful professionally was all of the hours and all of the yeses. And once that unlock happened and I started to experiment with, what if I say no? What if I push this to someone else? What if I say we can't do that this quarter unless we change our priorities? Like, what will happen? And the reality is it just made me better and better, right? No one was mad about that. People, at the executive level need to hear we need to change our priorities if we're going to say yes to that. That's your job. Took me too long to get there, though.
I was going to ask if there was either a catalyst or mentor. You mentioned this women coaching group. So would love to maybe dive into that or something else. But how did you, I guess, identify the problem or the opportunity, however you want to think about it? And then how did you work on yourself? I know this will be a theme as we kind of go back in time and start talking about your career, but your ability to kind of like bloom where you're planted. But how did you figure out you need to take a little bit different shape, and how'd you ultimately do it?
Yeah, so I had let myself get into a position where I was literally doing 3 jobs. I had been leading a large global organization, and then I took on an additional job on top of that. So I had 3 total jobs, and I was a mother to a 3-year-old, 4-year-old. So that also puts us in the core of the pandemic at that moment. And I was just deeply burnt out, right? I could feel that there was something wrong. And it's crazy. It was I saw a Facebook ad about burnout with this video. It was for an organization called the Good Life Institute, which is the women's coaching group that I got involved with. But essentially what we did is we just challenged those assumptions, right? I became part of the group. I think there's something when there are executive women together. It's not the easiest thing still to find other women who operate at this level, who are willing to be transparent about, hey, I'm really struggling with saying no, or a tough boss, or whatever the things were. So we had that level of support from each other, which was game changing. And then, we also had an opportunity to really, I think, challenge some of the assumptions for each other. Sometimes it's easy to see in someone else, like, well, do you really have to say yes to that request from your boss? I can see it in a friend who I'm coaching. I think it's a little bit harder when you have so much of your identity wrapped up in, I'm going to be the person who says yes. The other thing that happened for me in that coaching group was I came to realize that I was very single-threaded professional, in terms of like my whole identity was professional, right? I didn't have hobbies. I did have a kid, thankfully, because she gave me some perspective. But, I was not doing things outside of work. I didn't have time for it. And so the light bulb for me was like, man, I'm really, if something happened to this job, who am I after that? And I started leaning for me back into things I was interested in when I was a kid, right? I was on a youth commission, as a part of my county where I grew up, got back involved with the neighborhood association here. I used to do dog training stuff and rescue stuff, got back involved with fostering, right? And like bringing back some of those things that I hadn't had time for in a long time. You get a lot of professional flexibility, leeway, like when your identity is not just, I am the person who's really good at work and I'm going to say yes to whatever you need because of that. Suddenly you get a backbone in a lot of ways. You get some strength because if this job goes away, I still am the other things that I am. And I hadn't had that in the way that I needed to really kind of be a whole person, for lack of a better term. And it was, but it really kind of rounded out who I was and gave me some other facets of my life to lean into.
Yeah, made you more richer, more full as a human, which ultimately makes you a better executive and leader too.
I think that's
So,
spot on.
so we're going to dive in. We're going to talk a little bit, I know, about recruiting and hiring. That's a major, I think, hot button for most companies, something you've done really, really well over the years. We'll talk about, in your case too, mat leave and going and coming back and what that, some of those like epiphanies and challenges were for you. So hope folks stay tuned in. But why don't we go back and sort of start at the beginning a little bit? Just, where'd you grow up, and maybe try to hone in on some of these moments that matter from the early part of your life that you think molded you into the person you are and the leader you became.
I'm from the Bay Area. We started before we were recording, talking about earthquakes and all the things that you live with when you grow up in the Bay Area. I was a nerdy kid who, like I said, was on a youth commission and was very sort of politically interested. And so when it came time to go to college, I found myself very attracted to this little school called Claremont McKenna, which probably not a lot of people have heard of, particularly if it's mostly tech types who are listening to this. In DC, which is where I live, it is relatively well known because it turns out a lot of government and economics types of people who end up attracted to DC or to public service. And I was attracted to it because it just felt like, I don't know, I went and I took the tour and I spent the night, and I remember sitting in like a dorm lounge having this like pretty nuanced policy conversation with like a bunch of other kids. And I was just like, oh, damn, these are my people. I need to be there.
I found my tribe. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It felt really good. It felt like interesting. And so I went to Claremont McKenna, CMC. It's part of a 5-college system. So it's sort of amazing because you go to this really small school. I think it was smaller than my high school, 1,000 kids at the time that I was there. But there's 5 other colleges and you all share campus resources, libraries, dining halls, whatever. So you go to one of them, but you can take classes at the others. So I never felt like I was in like an only politics bubble. Although being in an only politics bubble, I would have been thrilled because that's what I was into. And I was a government and psychology major. So the government part was obvious. Like I knew that's kind of what I was interested in. I didn't know how to make it a career really or have aspirations around that. I ended up also being a psychology major because, and it was not like, I didn't love the organizational psychology and social psych. I didn't like the psych classes. What I liked was the stats. And so I was a psych major so that I could get a really good stats training, and wrote my thesis on Asian American political behavior and how to dissect like all the different segments of the Asian American populace in terms of voting behavior. And and so I just got to kind of nerd out, but I also felt like I was learning. That psych part gave me some actual skills that I felt like I could rely on when I went out in the real world.
Actual skills, not the government stuff that you weren't sure you'd know how to apply. Is that what you mean?
Well, I think, I think knowing how to use Excel or knowing how to do a statistical analysis or whatever, like those are things a company, I had some vague sense somehow. My parents are both, my mom worked in a contact center. My dad is an electrician for the San Francisco Opera and Ballet. So like neither of them was really guiding me toward any kind of a white collar job. I'm not sure how I knew this, but I had a sense that at some point I was going to have to sell some kind of skill set to an employer. And a lot of people from CMC go into management consulting or to become lawyers. I married one of those become lawyers who I met there. And but I didn't want to do those things. And so I was lucky we had, instead of studying abroad, we had a semester in Washington, DC. And so I came to DC in the fall of 2001, worked at a political polling firm. It was a really robust program. Like we worked full time and we took classes at night and we had to write basically like another thesis. So it was an incredible opportunity to be in DC, which I had never done before. I'd never been to DC before I came on the program. And like I said, it was the fall of 2001. So 9/11 actually ended up being my second day of work. That was a Tuesday. The day before, we had just started at my little public opinion polling firm where I was interning. We'd been here 5 days, something like that. We toured the White House the weekend before, which was a thing you used to be able to do, just show up and walk around the White House or walk around the Capitol. And so it was just a real coming of age thing. I mean, I remember being in my boss's office watching the second plane hit the second tower. We'd sort of heard about the first one. And then about a half hour after that happens, the Pentagon was hit. My house at the time, I was living in a 3-bedroom apartment with 6 young women who had all come to intern, and we had to it was in Virginia, basically overlooking the Pentagon. Like our bedrooms overlooked sort of a smoldering Pentagon, and we all had to get ourselves home. And it was just if you go from sort of living on campus, nerfy life to, wow, I'm 3,000 miles away from my family and working.
The world just changed.
Yeah, everything is different. I just feel like I became a grown up that day, and I've never really gotten away from DC since. I've moved away temporarily, but I just feel like the District of Columbia and I got sort of bonded at that moment.
Yeah, galvanizing, I imagine, for sure. Yeah, I have a similar story, and where I was when that happened is just forever etched in my mind too. So I guess you take that experience. I know you're still in DC, so it was largely a positive experience despite what happened on 9/11. You graduate and you moved back into something in public opinion and polling, right? Like that was sort of the path you saw yourself going down.
Yeah, I mean, what a perfect mix of, I get to be in politics, but I also get to use this like statistics and survey background. So I was a political pollster. I did both like horse race polls for candidates, and I did a lot of messaging research too. I would work with recruit people to be in focus groups about different ways to message a political position, for example. And I got to do a lot of writing and a lot of analysis. I also happened to have a boss who was harsh, shall we say. This person becomes I don't want to talk too much about it on this podcast, but she ends up in the White House later, and she had a real love for picking apart whatever work we did in a very kind of vicious way. And honestly, I look back and like that taught me a lot. It just thickened my skin in a way that I needed it, right? To be able to write a research paper and hand it to someone and have that person like really pick it apart in a mean way. You just have to learn really quickly that like, take what I need to take out of this and leave the rest behind. And so I got a thick skin out of that. And I learned a lot about, I think I took a lot of lessons away around how I wanted to lead teams and how I wanted people who were being led by me to feel when they were getting feedback, which is a really important thing. But I saw some feedback delivered in not an optimal way when I was in
Yeah, I imagine that's right, though. I imagine it really made you tough, and also not callous, but like tough in the having worked with you in the past, like tough, but also able to find the nuggets even when the feedback's delivered in a suboptimal mode. Like you can still find there's value in there somewhere that you can latch onto. And then you touched on this too, but knowing exactly how you wanted to then lead and give feedback. Obviously, we fast forward, a handful of years, and that becomes super important. Did you recognize it at the time? Were you like in those moments? Are you recognizing, like, man, I don't want to do this someday, or I want to be able to give feedback differently?
I don't think so. I mean, I probably was taking away those messages, but I was surviving, right? That job was really hard. It paid me $28,000 a year, I think, which even then was not a lot of money to live in DC. And it was really, really hard. It's hard to be starting out, but I built great relationships with my peers in the office. I learned a lot from them. I built a great support system from them. They are still people I'm close to today. Like you get with any group of people that you sort of go through fire with, you bond. So I've always been the kind of person who sees the good. And, I can see what I'm getting out of a situation, even if it's a painful situation. And it was really hard. I learned a lot. And, I don't think I was conscious of like the great life lessons I was taking away. I was like, every day I got through, I was like, okay, I survived that one.
Yeah.
Let's do the next one.
Deep breath, like
Yeah,
kind
right.
of clench your teeth and get ready for tomorrow. So I mean, I'm sure that's part of the reason you left. Is that the reason you found something new after that? Just kind of like had enough of the abrasion.
Yeah, it was time. I was frustrated, and so I ended up at a PR firm. I'm doing similar research, like using my research skills, using the stat skills, doing more both quantitative and qualitative work. And this is another one where when I look back, like, 10, 15 years later, the skills I learned in that job, like, saying something to a focus group of people. I got focus group certified at this point, so I was like actually running the focus groups myself, and we would message stuff, and you could watch the faces in the room and see what landed, what didn't. Like, can I tweak the wording of that for the next group? And I'm struck now looking back at how much I relied on that skill when I was a sales engineer, because it's the same thing, right? When you're sitting in the room, you can feel that landed, that didn't land, let me try something different. And I approached that sales engineering role with a very much like, okay, I'm going to A/B test this and see what works mindset, because of that research background. So yeah, I spent a couple of years at this PR firm, kind of helping companies land their messaging. That was political work and also some corporate work, so I got a little bit out of the politics thing. Then I moved to the Consumer Electronics Association, where I did all of the research around that big show, CES, the big electronics show
Cool.
they do in Vegas. Yeah, it was
That's a
super fun.
blast. I've been a couple times. That's a hoot.
It was super fun. It was an amazing experience to, like, be there and be trying to capture, like, I think it's 140,000 people go, trying to boil down their sentiment into something we could take away and learn from in the next year. So it was a very, very cool experience. I hope to stay there a really long time. I was into tech, and I was like, I'm working at this really cool company that represents all the people in tech. But unfortunately, I was a newlywed in that moment, and my husband was going to law school at UVA, so we had to move to Charlottesville, and they couldn't figure out a way for me to work remotely. Which I've worked remotely in every job ever since. So the next company figures out a way for me to be remote, but I had to leave CEA. Spent a couple very scary months thinking, okay, my husband quit his job to go to law school. I now couldn't stay in the job I had hoped to. Was doing a little like statistical consulting, again, like relying on that skill set I had to analyze stuff. And then thankfully ended up hired by this company called Customer Sat, which did this new thing called customer experience, which was very uncomfortably at the time, like, it was a shift from market research, which was all anonymous, right? Like, you would, you get 1,000 customers and you ask them what they think about something, and their names are never associated with it. And Customer Sat and Medallia were at the forefront of this new space, which became customer feedback management. And the core insight was, man, like, if a customer of ours tells us something, we should like associate their name with it and do something about that.
Maybe
Like,
ask them if they want us to close the loop.
maybe,
Right.
yeah, maybe see if they'd like us to fix it. I mean, it was just at the time, though, like, this is 2007, 2008, like, that thought is very uncomfortable for people. And like the idea that
Especially growing up with that research pedigree, right? Where it was
totally. I mean, I'm like, well,
almost
of
more
course it has
academic.
to be anonymous. We tell people right at the front, we'll never associate it. But I was open-minded about it. I saw companies really getting value out of calling people back and fixing the problems they had. And so I was hooked. This customer experience.
What you're saying is you said yes. This is still in the yes phase.
I said I'm very much still in the yes phase. Yeah, the yes phase goes for a much longer time. So I ended up in a role at this company, Customer Sat, that I think now we would call it customer success, sort of part professional services, part, upselling and retaining customers. So yeah, I mean, I was using the market research stuff, but it's my first time in tech. And that
Was that scary? Like, did you correctly or incorrectly guess at how much of a delta that would be? Like, did that seem really scary and actually wasn't, or maybe you didn't know if it would be
honestly, I
scary
was
or not?
so desperate for a job. I very nearly took a job at oh gosh, it's a catalog company, and it's like in somewhere between Charlottesville and DC, big catalog company. They make farmy kind of stuff, and Plow and Hearth.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I very
You had me at farmy stuff.
but they very nearly took a job at Plow and Hearth, where like a third of the year they were like, you're going to be picking and packing in the warehouse. Like, everybody stops that market research stuff and like comes and picks and packs in the warehouse. And in retrospect, it worked out really well that I ended up at this company, Customer Sat. But no, I was desperate to support my new little couple dumb while my husband did his law school thing. So the tech thing I didn't fully appreciate. I had done some professional service kind of stuff in my other roles, right? I mean, all of the market research firms I had been in, client service and being responsive and those kinds of things were big tenets of that too. So that felt relatively natural. The problem with being in a yes mindset at a company where you're doing customer success is, I think I got quickly on a treadmill of being good at what I was doing and being good at fixing maybe where my colleagues hadn't done as good of a job. And so I found myself quickly accruing customers. And, so like I think an average person had maybe 5 accounts that they were working with on a day-to-day basis. By the time I left there, I had 20. And so I was just this big outlier in terms of my peer group. Because, something would break, someone would have a problem and they'd say, oh, well, Elena's our best person, she's going to take your account and she'll make you happy. And I could do it and I was good at it. And those accounts expanded. And I learned a lot about how to be good at professional services and how to make a customer, even if you're saying, I'm sorry, something broke, or I can't do the thing you need in the time you want, like how to land those messages correctly, which I think is an art and a super valuable skill. But I got on the treadmill of the yeses were too much, right? I should have stood up for myself and said, this isn't fair. I should be paid more. Like I didn't do any of those things. I just slowly let myself get very burnt out and very tired.
It sort of follows the arc of the eventual moment where you pivot from I'm going to keep saying yes to no, and there's minis where you probably change jobs because it feels so heavy. But if you think about that experience, the time, like I hear as an outsider, well, yeah, but you got we used to joke about this at a couple other companies too. It's a pie eating contest, and the winner just gets more pie, and that's sort of what you're describing. So I empathize. But I guess when you think about what are the things you took away from that? Because it was an intro to tech. It was, this mindset shift starting. It was a different job than you had done. Like you had some of the ingredients, but you probably hadn't put them together in the same way. So maybe if you think about that experience, are there a couple like seminal moments or lessons or honestly F-ups that you learned from? Like anything you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I think I didn't appreciate it at the time, but in retrospect, this was the first moment where I dipped my toe into the commercial part of the business, right? Because I was getting paid on renewals. So part of my job had to be not just making that customer really successful, although that was part of it, but having some of those commercial conversations around, like negotiating their next deal or negotiating a new
renewals
part of their program they were going to add. At the time, I didn't appreciate that that's what selling was, because I learned that in the next job. But that's what selling is in a lot of ways. And ideally, you're doing it from a place of making that customer really successful. So like on the positive side, definitely that. I think the skill set of building a really great solution for someone that's going to persevere and it's going to serve them well, and then being able to defend that value when it comes to a renewal or you're doing the next part of the program. I got exposed to that skill set there. Also, the fixing skill set, if you can go to an angry customer and turn that angry customer into a not angry customer, and ideally a customer who buys again, like that skill set is, that skill set is it in this economy. So I was really glad that I learned that. Also just, in retrospect, what I should have done is negotiate it better for myself. At one point in my career, I did get an offer from a competitor, and I brought it to my boss, and his reaction was, honestly, I was surprised. Like he almost seemed relieved that I had sort of found this external data point that he could use to get me what I deserved. Because I deserved it relative to my peers, relative to the value in the organization. But he hadn't been able to get that done just directly. And I had asked like lightly, but coming in with this external offer to really do that negotiation, it was a light bulb moment for me, because I think what I realized was my boss at the time did not have the ability to advocate for me. And wasn't
even if he had the desire, you don't think he had didn't know how or didn't have the juice.
Yeah, I think that's right. And looking back, it started to be my first lessons in kind of reading the power of the organization and seeing like this person who I'm reporting to, like they like me and they, but really what he liked about me was that I solved a lot of problems. And, I think a good person, but just didn't have the power in the organization. It's also, it was a weird economy then too. But he couldn't get it done. So I ended up staying. That negotiation helped me get a little bit more money and a little bit more time. It just extended the runway. I continued to accrue clients, get myself burnt out. And then I almost very nearly make the mistake of running away to work at a large credit union that is here in the DC area, basically running their customer experience work, because I was so burned out. And in retrospect, again, looking at that, I would have hated it. I would have hated that job. It would have been, what appealed to me about it was sort of banker's hours, right? I'm going to come in at 9, I'm going to leave at 4. Life is not going to be stressful. I'm not going to have to be apologizing to people all the time. I would have hated it though. I would have hated the pace. I would have hated not getting things done. It was just my burnout speaking, and this shrill alarm that was just kind of saying, like, you got to get out of here. You got to release the pressure somehow. So again, like, that's a pattern I repeat later in my life. I think like sort of emergency burnout, I arrive at a much better solution when I figure out that saying no to some stuff is a better way. But thankfully I got saved from this bad decision because I got a random call from a recruiter. It was after I had already accepted the new job and given notice at customer sat. And this recruiter said, there's this job. And, essentially what you're going to do is you're going to take all of the things you learned about running these customer experience programs, but instead of building them and owning the program like when it exists and apologizing when it breaks, your job's going to be only before the sale. So you're going to show up with the sales team. You're going to explain what the company should do. You're going to explain what would be great about that. And then you'll hand it off to someone in professional services who will actually build it. And the job is called sales engineer. And I was like, never heard of that. Never heard of a sales engineer. We didn't have them at customer sat. I think a lot of companies really didn't have them at that time. But Medallia had just done its Series B with Sequoia and was in this moment where they were investing in a real grown-up sales team. And part of investing in a real grown-up sales team was getting some sales engineering talent. That was a play that had worked very successfully for BMC, Blade Logic, like the coaching tree where these folks came from. And so I was intrigued, right? I mean, this recruiter is telling me that, like, I can use all the knowledge that I have, take all the best parts of my job in terms of like sharing best practices and helping people do things well and whatever, and leave behind all of the really painful apologizing, like, calls in the middle of the night because something's broken stuff. And by the way, the job pays, it's got this like amorphous thing called commission. And OTE, like I didn't know how to assess any of that stuff then. But the number on pay, the OTE number looked like twice what I was making in professional services. And so I basically said, okay, let's try it. I mean, what the worst that can happen, I know I've got a skill set in the stats stuff. Like if I can't sell or engineer, as the case may be, I can always go back to that skill set. And so I said yes. And I ended up at this little company called Medallia about, I guess it was September 10th. So many things happened in September for me. September 10th of 2012.
What was the hardest part about making that pivot? Like, I think about, you had a lot. I'm glad you did. We got to work together there. You've obviously been a huge asset at Medallia and had an incredible run there. Like, but the deck was sort of stacked. You'd already accepted another job, massively burnt out. And I think in hindsight, maybe it feels like a blessing you didn't take that job, but it had to feel like, oh my God, what a fresh breath of fresh air that's going to be when I can actually have some balance. And instead of going towards the balance side, you're like, I'm going to take a whole new challenge, right, with a job I've never heard of, with 2 words, sales and engineering, that probably sound a little scary too. Like, how do you, in hindsight again, like, how'd you get over that hurdle?
I mean, the sales and the engineer sort of loomed large for me. Like this recruiter was very, very good at explaining away those words for me and making me comfortable with them. And then I later got pretty good at that too, because I turned a lot of people into sales engineers who hadn't been previously. And it's an important skill. I don't know what I thought sales was. I mean, I really genuinely thought it was baseball games and restaurants and like
Glengarry Glen Ross.
Yeah. I mean, just like not what sales is. And then engineering, like I'm not an engineer, I'm a market researcher. I can engineer the hell out of a survey, but that's about it. So, I had that question, like, what are these things? I think the recruiter, a man named Dave Wiper, did an amazing, he's the best sales engineering recruiter I have ever seen in my life. And he did a great job of assuaging some of those fears. And then I met with Scott Davis and with Devakar, who would be my boss at Medallia. We met in person at a little corner bakery in Tyson's Corner. And, I could feel the energy with these two. And I could feel that we were still, Devakar gave me a demo. I've told him, like, in retrospect, it's not the very best demo I've ever seen of Medallia in my life. But it did kind of leave me thinking, like, I think I could do a better demo than that. And like he was not brought in to do demos. He was brought in to build
Yeah,
this,
build a team.
but I could feel the energy, right? I this product that Medallia had solved a lot of the things that were pain points in my old product, and which was a direct competitor. And so I kind of felt like, okay, I can get passionate about this product, which is for me like a bar I have to cross. I could not sell something that I do not deeply believe in. But by the time I had seen this product, I was like, do you kind of believe in this? It feels like it's solving a lot of the problems that like people are complaining to me about. And so then I just had to get my head around, engineering. Okay, not really an engineer, that's just what people call it. Sales, interesting. Maybe this is a skill set I have. And I'd done some presenting and a little bit of public speaking before. And this is an era where I say yes to stuff. And so, I felt like it was a bet. It was a bet on, I can probably figure this out. And I had seen enough in my career that like saying yes to hard stuff that I can probably figure out had paid off. And maybe this one would be that way too.
I don't know who coined this phrase, so I like won't even attempt to figure out who it was. But there's like the saying of like, I've only ever regretted the things I said no to, not the things I said yes to. I personally feel the same way, and I hear that especially in these first chapters of your book, where it's like, take the shot, bet on yourself, and like know that with some confidence and some humility too. Like it's going to take work, it's going to take a little bit of luck and some great mentors, but like I think I can figure this out. The thing that jumps off the page to me as you talk about it is that point of like you were hearing a company that could solve some of the problems that were causing your burnout, and so that's got to feel really interesting too, where it's like maybe I'm wrong, but if I'm not wrong, there's a huge problem. Like the tidal wave behind this, the suction could be really awesome too.
I was feeling that in my day-to-day life, right? We had not as good of a product, but we were selling pretty well, pretty sticky. I'd been through a recession with that product. We had seen it perform pretty well because like customer experience, as it turns out, is not something you cut when the economy gets bad. And so I just felt like this is a product that I resonate with and I am excited about. And Scott Davis and Devakar both, I just felt like these are really smart people who I could learn something from. And, I think this is the first intentional choice I think I made in my career where I was like, I want to be with those smart people. Like whatever those smart people are doing, I want to also be there. And I think that
what does Scott say? Like, you get on the rocket ship, doesn't matter what seat, like one of those.
Any seat on a rocket ship. But it's right. I mean, I tell people now, like high growth, if you can find a high growth company, there's so much career opportunity in that. And certainly that's how things work out for me because I spent 10 more years building at this amazing.
So let's pull it apart a little bit. So you start as an IC, individual contributor. You come in, your first sales engineering, solution consulting. I know that you changed the name of the title.
We changed the name at some point in there to solution consulting, which feels better to like 90% of us. Yeah.
To people that didn't grow up sales engineers, that feels like maybe less scary. But like maybe in that first year, like it's a ton of transition, a ton of learning. The company itself was transitioning, as you mentioned, from the first 10 years or so where it was bootstrapped, and they had a bunch of sales folks that were also kind of SMEs, and now morphing into this. Okay, we're gonna hire you. I think you said a like big professional sales org.
Yeah, like a real grown-up sales org. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got sales leaders, people that have made a career out of selling, not folks who are sales minded, but with subject matter expertise. So the company's going through that kind of metamorphosis. You're coming in, learning a new job. What do you take away? Like, again, benefit of hindsight here. Like, what did you learn there that you think helped you take the next step?
Yeah. I mean, I think a couple of things. One, with the benefit of hindsight, the way Devakar built that sales engineering team was absolutely genius. He hired, I think there were 6 of us to start with. 2 came from the space like me. So we were, like you said, sort of people with the subject matter expertise who knew the space really well. He hired 2 folks from professional services who knew the product just, lights out. And then he hired 2 professional sales engineers, right? People who were selling totally different things, but they knew how to demo. They knew their way around a sales cycle. They knew how to like structure everything that
the process.
All the process to how to work with sales, right? Because all of that stuff is learning curve. And the 6 of us, we're like 3 legs of a stool, right? Some of us know the space, some of us know the product, some of us know sales process, and we just work together flawlessly. I mean, a lot of those people stayed for 5, 6, 7, 10 years. but we could work really seamlessly together, and we all were learning from each other. So someone would teach me not to move my mouse around during a demo in the morning, and then I would be teaching a class about NPS in the afternoon, and we all just were leaning on each other so much, and it was such a constructive and helpful team of people. And we really, that made us smart about how to figure stuff out, right? We didn't have, I think we had a demo environment at that time. We all shared it. So, I remember going in like to give my client a demo, and like somebody's old logo was still sitting on the demo instance. The demo was a copy of some client instance that we had like sort of half cleaned up. I mean, we were building this stuff. Our RFP process was just, we'd taken every RFP that had ever been written in the last 5 years and put them all in an Evernote so that we could search it. I mean, it's
I
like
remember that.
scrappy stuff, but smart, right? It worked for us. And so, I think it was really cool to be there in the ground floor, like building an RFP database, building the second demo environment so that we didn't always have to say everything's a fitting room, right? When you're meeting with a bank, the screen saying fitting room just doesn't really make a lot of sense. So we started to build all that stuff out. And for me, it was really fun because I'm leaning on all that learning I had done about how to do a focus group, how to read the room, how to see what's resonating and what isn't. And then I've got this team of peers who like really wants to hear that I think we should say it like this and not like that, because I could just feel in the room that it was landing. And it turned out that I kind of had a knack for that, for having good meetings, for like feeling the room. On the negative side, like I did not close a deal for, I think it was a full year before it was a big deal. It was a big strategic deal by the time that it happened. But like that year was really hard because I felt the goodness. I felt like I was contributing a lot to other people's sales cycles. I felt like what we were learning was valuable and our tools were getting better and our pitch was getting better. But man, it took forever for me to finally have that success. And I mean, now I understand in retrospect that like these sales cycles are very, Medallia was the enterprise-ist of enterprise at that time. And those are just going to be long cross-functional sales cycles, right? You're not going to go in and close something quick in a business like that. But it was very hard mentally to see my peers like having that luck or picking stuff up or finding kind of exactly the right moment. And I was not having that. I was not having that success at first.
Was that helpful though? Was that like think of, I don't know, crappy example maybe, but that's like the forge, right? That kind of, again, makes you tough because you've been through one, it was a win. So you got to see the whole thing go through and then feel the dopamine kind of dump at the end.
The dopamine hit was exquisite for when you've built to it for that amount of time. Yeah.
And if you don't get it though, at some point that would have probably turned you off from sales or sales engineering and everything else too.
It could have. I was lucky to be surrounded by a team that really, I think we had a shared comp model, which is something that I maintained a lot as a sales engineering leader too. I think sometimes, like, depending on what verticals you're working in or whatever, like SC work and the opportunities are not one-to-one, right? The things that I was doing and the things that I was learning, I knew and felt were contributing to my peers' wins, even as I was not getting one of those big wins yet. And so, it taught me patience, but I felt from my team and in my heart that like what we were learning was working. We could see the flywheel kind of working, and it just wasn't my time yet. And I did some things to invest in my own training too. Like when I started at Medallia, I was not a very confident public speaker. I did Toastmasters. I did a lot of like very intentional practice in front of my peers to get good at it. Cause I needed to get over some of those humps, I think, to be effective too. So there were parts of it that were me upskilling. And then I guess some of sales is also luck and a volume game. Yep. And just, how long it takes.
It's luck, but you make your luck in that you say yes to things. And you just mentioned kind of casually, but putting forth, in my opinion, that discretionary effort, like that's everything. And when you see someone in their career who's willing to, hey, ask for feedback, right? To put themselves out there, to give feedback, and then to do, Toastmasters as a proxy, like invest in that, wherever they are in their career. It's so powerful. And so I think, was there an element of luck? Always. There's a little bit of luck in the fact that recruiter called you before you started at the other job, but like you make the most of those opportunities by putting forth that discretionary effort. So having worked with you in this moment where you're an IC, like I saw it then, and I think it's one of many things that sets you apart, but whether you see it or not, it's super admirable.
Well, and you hit on something there that was just like so key to our success, which is like the feedback and the prep and the cycles, right? Like it sucks to demo to your peers, right? I mean, the hardest demos and pitches and whatever I ever gave were never in a room with a client. it was the prep, the week before, where I was showing you the,
or
what I
midnight
was supposed to do.
before in the hotel lobby.
Hopefully not, ideally not, but in some cases you end up there. But like, that's way harder than in the room with the client. In the room with the client, I am an expert. They don't know the product. They don't know the stuff nearly as well as I do, right? In the room with my peers, like, we're all experts, and we picked it apart in a kind way, in a way that was always constructive. Like, and then we went out in the parking lot after a meeting, we did the same thing. And so, that creates
even great meetings, just to further that point, like not just after a bad or mediocre meeting, every single meeting we would debrief, and every single meeting there's something we could do better. And it like hard for me. I remember the first time that happened, I think it was actually with you and maybe with Nick, and it's like, we had a great meeting. You guys like, okay, we could have done this and that, and I was like floored. Like we just got a hug from this process, like a physical hug. Like couldn't have gone any better. Like yeah, totally could have gone better.
No.
It's always. But that's absolutely right. It was a good meeting, but like there's always more we can do. There's always something you can learn if you've got that kind of cultural element baked in. So kudos again to Scott, Devakar, and others for building and then reinforcing that.
Yeah, it was just a part of the cadence, and it was critical.
Yeah, we had to do it. And so we'll talk about that now, because we're about to pivot to you leading teams and then building your own culture there. But maybe first, like you were like one of, or maybe the top individual contributor in your role for years, and at some point you decided like it was time for you to make a jump or make a pivot into a leadership role. Like maybe talk to us a little bit about how did you get there? How did you know it was time? Why'd you make that pivot?
What happened was I had a leader who I was not a big fan of at the time, and I kept kind of bitching to Devakar, my like skip level boss, about all the ways in which this person was not living up to my expectations. And the wise Devakar at some point along the way just says, Elena, like you either need to decide you're going to step up and lead, or stop bitching. and that was like it was a crystallizing moment for me, because I had never pictured myself as a leader. Like I liked the individual contributor thing. I was good at it. I was getting a lot of like, good feedback, dopamine from that process. But ultimately, when I pictured myself, like I had a lot of opinions about how stuff should be run. I had a lot of opinions about the stuff that we weren't doing right. And he was basically saying like, step up or shut up. And I, that put the fire in me that I needed to, again, be like, yes, let me try it. Never aspired to be a leader. Don't know how to be a leader. Like haven't really done this, but
said yes.
Yeah. Said yes.
Yeah. I want to talk about this moment for a minute. Like what a hard thing for him for Devakar. One, hard conversation. I think great leaders get really good at having hard conversations and navigating that tightrope. But this was a tightrope moment with one of your top people coming to you with a almost impossible scenario, right? It took a lot of spine. It took a lot of probably maybe just experience to know how to navigate that conversation, maybe just EQ, knowing you a little bit too. But the fact that he was able to lay it out for you in a way that was black and white, but didn't kind of push you out the door, is noteworthy in and of itself. So do you think about that the same way? Is that something you masterful?
I mean, at the time, I don't think I could have parsed it like this, but now as a person who's led a lot of people through moments like this, like, I think it kind of comes down to knowing people's love languages, right? Like, and there's love languages for love. There's love languages for work, or at least that's what I believe. So some people love the spotlight. Some people love impact. Some people love money. Some people, I think he had a good read on me that this wasn't about, it wasn't a money thing that was going to motivate me. It was like, do it right. I had a point of view. I'm an optimizer, right? Like I put cream in before I put coffee in, because then the coffee stirs the cream and you don't need a stirring stick. Like I think like that. And so not being in a leader position, I could just see all the things that weren't happening. And I think he knew me well enough to know like the right pitch is, you are going to have to shove all those feelings down and not say them anymore if you don't step into this role. And like the thought of growing people in that way, I think that was a moment where I was witnessing a very strong leader practicing his craft. And I don't know if I had if I could have articulated this at that time, but like looking back, I think there was something in that too. Wow, that's a cool skill. Like I wonder if I could do that.
You're almost like, damn, that was awesome. I want to do that. I want to help someone else have this epiphany moment. Yeah. So you said yes. You said okay, let's do it. You grab the reins. You lead a team like that. Eventually, that team starts growing. But like, what are what are the kind of seminal moments there? I mean, you talked about that team. I think you had to do a ton of recruiting and hiring almost right off the bat. Is that
So
right?
much, because we were
Yeah.
growing so fast, which is, I mean, that's amazing, right? It's a really cool position to be in. If you're in your, what am I, 32, 33 at this point? Like, and all of a sudden I'm, okay, run a little team of sales engineers, go find them, and then run a team of teams of sales engineers. Like whenever I give somebody advice about companies to end up in, that's the rocket ship effect, right? It's kind of like we're going up and up and up, and there's going to be lots of opportunities. So yeah, I did a lot of hiring, got really good at finding, I think sales engineering hiring in particular, although I think this is true of other roles as well, you can't just pluck the sales engineer you need off the shelf. You certainly couldn't then when sales engineering was not nearly as prominent a career path, but even now, I mean,
nor were we very far up the commodity curve. I think,
no.
potentially the more commoditized product you're selling, maybe there is that, like, I can find this human that has done this job somewhere similar, but that wasn't where we were.
Not for us. And so, so what did I need? I needed people who could get technical, could get comfortable with demoing, like enjoyed technology. I needed people who could speak eloquently and tell stories and those kinds of things. I needed people who could kind of geek out about businesses and how customer experience might move the needle at a particular company. And so I started to, and they needed to be able to work well with sales, and they needed to be, it's just like all of those things. You're not going to pluck them off a shelf. So you get really good at identifying the 3 or 4 things that this sales engineer is going to need to have over time, and assessing what's this person's gap, because there is one, and what are my chances of solving that gap. Knowledge gap, like don't know the space, don't know the product, those are the easiest ones to solve, right? If we can't teach somebody the product or the space, we're not doing it right. How to demo, not that hard to teach, right? Don't squiggle your mouse all over everywhere. Like, try to stick on a screen at once, tell stories, be engaging. Like, you can teach that to some extent. The non-negotiables are coachability, right? I can't teach you that if when I give you feedback, you shut down and you don't want to hear it, right? So one of the things that we would always very intentionally do in our hiring process was we did a challenge. I can't imagine hiring without seeing somebody do something like the work. So we did a challenge. And then after the challenge,
can you real quick, like for those that don't know what a challenge is, I use one as well. I think probably you said coaching tree from BMC PTC. I like that analogy. Like, so anyone in that tree knows what you mean, but can you describe that for folks that maybe don't?
Yeah, just something that I did it for product marketers too. Like anything you're hiring, some kind of challenge that shows some of the skills that you would be using. So we had a little fake dummy demo. I mean, the simplest version of this for a sales engineer is just like, give me a 5-minute demo of something you are passionate about, right? Like whatever it is, so that I can see the skills at work. For product marketers, I used to give them like a new product we had acquired and ask them how it might fit in with the existing, look at our website, tell me how this product might fit in, and like, where would you position it, right? Something to show how they're doing the actual job, because I need to see them speak. You can't get that from a reference. I need to see their brain answer questions in the room. You can't get that you just can't get those things from a reference. And it needs to be something somewhat similar to the thing you're going to be doing in terms of complexity or, or business acumen. I used to just kind of also ask people in interviews, like, I found that like really getting into the business models of companies could often be a gap, right? Connecting how delivering a slightly better customer experience at scale could drive money. And so just like asking questions in the interview process that helped me see how they could make those kinds of connections helped me a lot. So that's what a challenge is, just like getting the person doing something that they would actually do in the job. A reasonable facsimile of, you don't want something that takes days of prep, but like something that shows you them in action.
And in sales, I think all parts of sales, probably anything that's like external customer facing, it's so important, because look, all of us can talk at some point. If you've been in and around sales or CS or, some function where you're, a big part of your job is interfacing with other people at other companies, like, you can do the thing, but like, or pretend to do the thing, but I want to see you actually on stage. I want to see you react to a curveball. I want to see you, like, I'm looking for overwhelming prep in what they did, and that some of that discretionary effort shining through, a little bit of energy and some passion. Like, you can't fake it when you do it. One of the other things you mentioned when we were prepping, I'd love you to maybe expand on here too. As you were identifying these humans, and like you said, everyone's got a gap, right? And which of these 3 or 4 things are they spiky, and where's the gap? I think I remember you saying you tailored the challenge a bit too, to make sure that you were, I don't know, you're kind of grading on a curve, right? Like I don't want it to just be on how well you present. If I know that's the thing I'm going to teach you, I need to make sure that you're really good at these other things that I think you're spiky at. So maybe speak to that a bit if you can.
Yeah, I think I just saw an article on LinkedIn today about sales engineering hiring. And one of the things that really scared me about it was it said something like 60% of sales engineering hires like go with their gut first. And well over half don't have a matrix of the skills that they might somewhat have a matrix of the skills that you're trying to go to. Like you need to know what your sales engineer needs to be able to do, right? And so that's going to be presenting, understanding a business model, demoing, answering questions in the room, working well with the sales team, which is, especially if you're bringing someone who's not from sales, that's a big wild card that you have to kind of feel out. So for any one of those things, number one, have a hiring rubric, have everybody have the hiring rubric. If you don't do that, you are inviting bias into your process. Like you need to know what you're looking for and systematically look for it in ways that are consistent in terms of how you measure the talent and evaluate the talent. But then number two, like that matrix, if I know you're a sales engineer, a trained sales engineer who's been successful, yeah, I'm like much less interested in your ability to demo. I'm much more interested in your ability to pick up the space, because that's actually the gap I'm going to have to solve. So maybe I just want to talk to you about customer experience you've had and how that how you think that played out in the company's business model, right? Maybe we're asking questions like that to evaluate that part of you. But I don't have a different curve for every candidate. What I have is a set of questions that are tailored to that candidate because I suspect they've got a gap in one area that I really need to get comfortable that I'm going to be able to fill.
Okay. Yeah, I think so many companies are looking for the unicorn, and by all means look for him or her. You may find a few, but you've also got to, like, especially if you hope to achieve any kind of scale, you've got to be able to meet people where they are and then turn them into the people you need them to be for the company. And so it struck me as we were talking about this, like knowing, like we took a lot of folks, like I actually didn't have a traditional sales background myself. And so, and I know like Zach and some others who came from client facing jobs that weren't sales, like getting them comfortable with that, and then giving them the space and the support to be able to grow into the awesome sales and sales leaders they've become. Like we did that incredibly well at Medallia.
Like I didn't come from a sales background. You learn it, right? It's a skill set. And like unicorns don't scale. Unicorns are wonderful. If you can find a unicorn, that is amazing, but unicorns don't scale. And the way you know you're a scaling company is when you build these processes that allow you to turn non-unicorns into unicorns, right? And that's what we were doing. We were finding people who were exceptional and had great drive and had the raw talent to figure this stuff out and training the rest. Like a little in the front and then a lot in the field. And that's the only way to do it as fast as you need when you're moving, from B to C, kind of in this era of a company. You have to be able to move that fast. We got really good at spotting raw talent and honing it into what we needed.
Yeah, I agree. And so thinking about spotting raw talent, maybe let's talk about that for just a few minutes too. We also discussed this in the prep, but like sourcing and finding these folks, because to your point, for better or for worse, and probably a little bit of both, it wasn't as easy as, we need to find a person with this title in any of these 10 companies and we'll be able to make them successful. It was, and probably is for most companies, quite a bit harder than that. So maybe speak to that for the listeners too. Like I think it's something you did. You spent a lot of your own time in, and I've modeled that too. Like I think hiring's everything. You get the right people, your life's great. You don't, your life's not. So maybe speak to that a bit.
Hiring is it, right? And we've all watched sales leaders who have people follow them. And so that's a really good sign. If you're any kind of a leader and your people follow you to a place, that's a really good sign. I think we had a lot of opportunity to grow non-traditional candidates into sales engineers. We turned lots of market researchers, myself included, into sales engineers. We made, I think we had teachers and educators kind of moving into this space. Like there are a lot of people who can step into these kinds of roles if you have the right process to.
Y'all hired clients. Like we had folks that were practitioners, come in and be awesome in the role too. And they were some of the best
because that person can sit across the table from you and say, I've been you and here's what I experienced. But if that person can't work in the ambiguity of a sales organization, it's not going to work, right? And somebody who's a client or who comes from professional services may find their first RFP with a slightly dicey, can you do this question, and like get really uncomfortable, right? There's a balance to how do we live in the kind of, the gray area of sales where we're trying to build something with a client that commercially is viable? Not every type of mindset or prior role can make that switch. So it's, it's all about really understanding, like, what are the likely fail points? What are the places where if we hire this person, they probably are going to have the hardest time? And you start to get a good sense of, from the background that they're coming into to this role, like if you're hiring enough people, you get some really good, and sharing notes, and looking at, I've spent a lot of time looking back. I think every time I've ever had to fire someone or felt like somebody wasn't the right fit, like I've gone back to the challenge notes and the hiring notes and like, what did we see? What did we test? Did we ask,
what did we get wrong? Yeah.
What did we get wrong? Because there's always something to learn from those. So just getting really systematic about that. And then also, I mean, that's in every step of your talent process. That's important, right? When you do annual reviews, I always did like a calibration layer with my team. Because what I don't want is an easy grader and a hard grader, and suddenly I don't have a good sense of how everybody is across the business. So like rubrics, things that keep you consistent, and then I think it's really important to have that kind of calibration layer as well. We also did it at Medallia quite a bit with sales engineers would be in the room for sales, or sales engineering leadership would be in the room for sales directors, and vice versa, because we see things that the other side doesn't, right? From both perspectives. And so kind of bringing in, it's not quite 360, but it like this really valuable other perspective. I think I saw a lot of sales directors hired who, the minute I met them, I was like, this person's not going to be successful. And I was right. Sometimes you just feel it in a different way when you work side by side and you're not as invested in hiring. We also, one other thing we did at Medallia that I think was really smart. We had a whole hiring philosophy. We had people trained on that hiring philosophy. And anytime you made a hire, someone from some totally different part of the business who was not in any way invested in whether you got your next sales engineer today had to sign off on the fact that person was a cultural fit. And not cultural fit like would have a beer with, because there are problematic things about that. But cultural fit as in, this person has a growth mindset. This person feels like they're not going to be an asshole. This person feels like they're hungry to learn stuff, right? Like whatever that core set of values was, this completely uninterested person who had no vested interest in making that hire had to sign off. And it was genius, because it meant that some people talk about no assholes policies or like whatever. I think about my personal hiring framework as something I call good-natured ass kickers, or GNACs, right? Think about two circles in a Venn diagram, right? Good-natured, good people you want to work with, people who lift their peers up. Ass kickers run through walls and get shit done. And like, I want to work at the center of that. I don't want to work with ass kickers. They are not kind to people. They step on people. They just politically, they are toxic. Good-natured people are wonderful, but I want to get shit done. So like thinking about the center of that Venn diagram was really powerful for me. And I think Medallia did a great job of operationalizing, looking for those kind of people through the process they used.
Yeah, totally agree. I think lots of great things from those years, but the talent that we brought in to me still stands out as, and there was a process where it was not an accident. Folks like you and others had a hand in hiring, but to your point, there was also real process. It was not just gut. It wasn't just, I'd love to grab a beer with them. There was a lot to it. At times frustrating, and at times slowed us down. But I think way more often than not, the right folks got through.
Yeah.
I want to talk maybe one more point on this sort of chapter. You had talked earlier in your career about receiving feedback, maybe not handed out the nicest, or in a way that is where the most valuable notes were getting through all the time. Now you're in a role where you're not giving peer-to-peer feedback, which you were great at, but that's very different than, okay, now you're a leader to folks that are working directly for you. What was that pivot like? Like, did you find that challenging to like change the way you give feedback? Was it actually pretty much the same? Would love to chat about that a bit too.
I don't think it changed a ton. I think I'll tell you what I don't remember now if it was Scott Davis or Dan Fougere, but like one of those early sales, very senior sales leaders, I think it was Dan Fougere. We walked out of a meeting. It was one of my earliest meetings. I am by far the most junior person in this meeting. And when we get into the parking lot, we're doing the debrief. He turns to me to answer first feedback. And I thought it was really smart, because if you're a leader and you walk into the parking lot to talk about the meeting and you just start talking about the meeting, you've stunted everybody else's, ownership of saying what they observed in that meeting and giving the feedback themselves an opportunity to practice giving their peers feedback. So I thought that was genius. It also, at the moment, I was like, oh, I don't know, like I've never done this before. But I quickly learned that like part of my job in that meeting was to get us the feedback and for the parking lot conversation. I think we created a very psychologically safe place for feedback, and it was just modeled up and down the chain. And I think that's really important. If the feedback I was getting in my early career was not 360 degrees of feedback, it was not welcome in every direction, it was not constructive, it was not kind. Our parking lot feedback was kind and it was oriented toward the deal, right? Like our job is to make each other better. We are not going to be afraid to say hard things in this parking lot. And we're all going to get better because of it. And when you have that mentality, like, it is my job to make the deals close and to make the next meeting better. And so, I think there was a culture up and down the chain of creating safety for that. And if you didn't react well to that feedback, like you were not going to have a very good long medallia career.
How do you operationalize it? Like I think even with some of the companies I'm working with now at Budburst, this is the thing most of the time, but it's not all the time. And it's a challenge to get this like really baked into the DNA and the culture of the company to say, no, every single meeting, if it's worth doing the meeting, if it's worth having a demo, it's worth doing the prep. And if it's worth doing the meeting, it's worth having the debrief. And like, did you find any challenges there, or again, with that tone already set and you just had to kind of make sure it didn't get any broken?
Yeah, I think at various times in our history, it got dicier or better. And in different teams, it got dicier or better. Like, I think for me, and I always coach this in sales engineers that I hired, like your job, and I think people who gravitate toward a sales engineering type of role they're kind of people pleasers, right? We want to make the people around us happy. We want to do the thing that we're asked to do. We want to say yes to stuff. It's who we are. And that is the wrong thing for closing the deal. It feels good, but like if I need to call out that our champion doesn't really seem very champion-y, that they were texting under the table the entire meeting, like I have to be able to say hard truths like that, or I'm making us feel good, but I'm not actually helping the deal. So I think, a big part of it was that, like just getting people's heads around the idea that like your job is to make us all better. If that requires giving difficult feedback, like you will do it. And I think, if I were a leader who was having trouble enforcing this, like I would put it right alongside forecast meetings, right? What meetings did you have last week? What were the key takeaways? What deal key takeaways were there and what did you learn from them, right? I would be asking that question to, again, set the tone that this is a thing I expect. I expect that this team is walking out. I would also, and have in my career, triangulated with the other people who are in that room, right? Like I would call the sales engineer. I would call, hopefully there's a sales leader in most big meetings like that. Like I would call that person and understand what the feedback was, because if that's not happening, I want to make it very uncomfortable for everybody involved that it didn't happen.
Yeah, that's all great. I think those are great nuggets. There's a bunch of ways you can force it to be on the calendar. That doesn't mean people are going to show up, right? The meeting goes long, and did you actually punt the next meeting to make sure that you did because especially in today's virtual world, we're back to back. So you got to make room for it.
You got to be less back to back. Like that stuff needs to get scheduled. You call it out. I would call it out when it happened. Hey, we need the 30 minutes after this for the parking lot, or where's the Zoom for us to call while we go back to the airport or whatever. Like, you make it work within practical boundaries, but you got to get it done, because those are the learning moments, right? We don't go to school to learn our jobs. Like we learn our jobs in this feedback. It's the only way you get better. And so if you skip that step, like
I might argue it's the only way you don't get worse. Like, yes, you could get better, but like I think with the absence of that, you will, like we all devolve to entropy. It's like you will get lazy. You will say the same things you said before, versus like constantly reinventing and scrutinizing them. So yeah, I totally agree.
I think that's the same way about prep. I prep meticulously for things now. I saw us in this like kind of outline document right before we came on here to record this, right? We are who we are. We are meticulous preppers. We make a plan for stuff, and why are your meetings are precious. Like you don't get a lot of at-bats in these enterprise deals or any of them. You can't afford to kind of go in hoping, riding on what you did the last time.
Yeah, totally agree. So if you have bats, especially with senior people, especially in large accounts, that you've got to make it, it's just worth overdoing it, like leave nothing to chance. Okay, I want to move us into the next act, the no portion of your career.
Yeah.
So you basically you're an IC, you crush it there. Devakar gives you this kind of like hard love. It helps you take the jump into becoming a leader. Your scope kind of grows and grows and grows, and they're managing teams and teams of teams and this and this, and the roles and responsibilities keep piling up. So maybe you take us through like how and when you got to this point where you, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, like burning out again and realize, okay, I got to make a change. What was the scope of the role when that happened?
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's a couple more years and a couple more roles before I finally break and get into the no era. But 2016, I was pregnant with my daughter, and I had to get off the road. And so Medallia, very wisely, we happened to be going into another Forrester wave of our space. The 2011 wave had been a big part of the company's success so far. It was in basically every meeting we had. And so Elizabeth Carducci and I think Berga and Amy looked around the company and said, who can do this next Forrester wave? It's really critical. And they so wisely said, the sales engineer is perfect for that. And happened to have one who was looking for an opportunity to get off the road. So I take a couple years off from sales and I run analyst relations. I did waves, eventually did magic quadrants as well, got really good at the process of that, which I've come to believe looks a lot like a sales cycle, right? You very similarly, you can influence criteria. There's like an RFP-ish thing. There's a big pitch with all the executives and you've got to really nail it. It requires all the same meticulous prep, feedback, like all the things. And so I was really lucky to get that opportunity. I really took to it, doing some consulting around that now in my fun employment time as well. But I was really lucky to get that opportunity. At the same time, then I kept analyst relations, took the sales engineering org back. It was about 140 people. We needed somebody to run the global org again. And I said, sure, I will run a 140 person organization. And by the way, if a wave or an MQ shows up, I will also do that, in addition. And then product marketing needed to be rebuilt. And so I said, yes, sure. Analyst relations is often a part of product marketing. I'll take that too. And so that's where the era of yes ends, or probably a few months after that, when I realized like I cannot be a mom to a 4-year-old in a pandemic and doing 3 separate jobs. And so that's when I, got some of the coaching that I needed to kind of get my head around a new era of no for me, which was an amazing transformation.
So you've got more weight than you can carry, and that's saying something because you've shouldered a lot now, like having done that. Like whatever you're willing to share, like how did that conversation go? Like you just kind of, you have this epiphany, you found this great coaching group. I'm sure you've talked to some other, mentors and friends, and, you get up the courage to then go and say, hey, I want a smaller job. Like, what did that look like?
Basically, yeah. I mean, I think it took all of us getting our heads around the idea that I had 3 separate jobs and I really was doing them. Part of that was on me because I had made a hire in one of the roles that really was not the right person. And so I make a mistake here that prolongs the pain I was in because, this hire, it's like, that feeling you get when you see the person perform for the first time and you're like, oh, I think this isn't going to work. And I let it go too long before I took action and made a change there, which harmed the rest of the team around this person because, they had to kind of step up and do that person's role. And I had to step up and do that person's role. And so it was really, I think it's one of those like obvious leadership lessons that you hear other people say, but until you're in it and you're the person who's made this decision. And by the way, it's a really busy time and hard to deal with. So that was really kind of a painful part of the lesson for me.
Is the lesson there meaning that just that your gut knew and that you sort of like hope to be able to put it off, or maybe that you were wrong? Is that the lesson?
Yeah, my gut knew. I was like, maybe I can coach my way out of this. Maybe I can, really just triple down on helping this person, and you should do that. And I think, when you've made a bet on somebody, you have an obligation to try to make it work. But I asked the team around this person to step up and help them longer than I should have. And once I had that gut feeling, what I should have done is triangulated it quickly with a couple of people, made an immediate plan for, I'm going to give this 3 months and it's either out or, like put this person on a plan quickly. Because if I had done that, we would have had comfort that it was going to end and be solved. And that person would have had the grace of going on to do great things somewhere else, which they did. And it wasn't a fit for in a very weird way that we did this particular function. So I wish in retrospect I had moved faster than I had, because it would have been fairer to that person, fairer to the rest of the team. And for me, I think it hastened my demise in that role.
Well, and I just think this is such an important, like, newer leaders, or in this case, you're not even new at having been a leader, but we forget that, like, one, almost always trust your gut. That doesn't mean act on it all the time, but acknowledge it. And then to your point, triangulate, on that gut feeling you have. And then when we know it's time to make a change, I think it's so common for people to go, well, we could, and there might, and what if, and you kind of can love people to death. And it's like, if it's not the right place for them, it's not the right place. And that doesn't mean they're good, bad. It's just not the right fit. And there's thousands of awesome tech companies where they may be a great fit. And the longer you're, like, I guess, allowing them to not be great doing their best work, and then everyone else having to help shoulder that weight, the longer they're not, like, excelling, and the longer everyone else is in pain. And I think, it's just such a hard lesson. I've had to learn it many times. I keep touching the stove myself, right, from time to time. I've already learned this. Why am I doing it again? But these moments happen. They're uncomfortable, but it's when you know.
Humans are going to human, right? We can't be perfect, but like recognizing that we can't be perfect, that the expectation is not that we be perfect. The way I handled it was not fair to anybody involved. It wasn't fair to the person. It wasn't fair to the rest of the team. And in the end, and it wasn't fair to me either, although I definitely would have put that at the bottom of the list. But in retrospect, that was a thing that was breaking me. So you asked about, kind of how does the breaking point go? I mean, I basically had to raise my hand and go to the CEO and say, look, I can't, all these roles, I can't do them anymore. It's too many. We need to, how can we, either I'm going to go and do something simple. I'm going to run to my proverbial, I wouldn't have gone to the bank again. I know enough about myself now to know, like, what kinds of places I thrive, but I got to get out of here to simplify things. Or can we figure out a role that takes the essence of me and gets rid of some of the stuff that somebody else can run? And thankfully, the company was open to that. They ended up putting me on the executive team as I had a lot of title, but it boils down to chief strategy officer in the end. And so I was continued running analyst relations, never gotten rid of that again. Nor would I want to. It's a really strategic and important thing when you do it right. Product marketing. And then I had some just small parts of the sales engineering organization that were strategic, where we were making investments, and in demo engineering, right? All of the tools that help make sales successful, but not the actual operational sales role. And that editing put me in a place where I could actually do my best work again, where I had enough mind space to prioritize, and I wasn't just like running from one fire to another anymore.
So you're in that new role, which awesome. Again, you had another really hard conversation, and God bless that leader for, like, recognizing it and helping navigate a tough time for the company and for you into I think a great outcome. And so you've got this new role. Like, what did you have to learn now? Like, now you're starting to say no to stuff. You've got a scope that actually starts to feel manageable, but the requests don't stop. The things that you have, like you previously said yes to, don't stop. And so I imagine there's a period of getting used to, and maybe even good at, saying no the right way. So maybe talk about that too.
Yeah, but I think, it's funny. I just made this connection now, but like saying no the right way, and it's when you said it, that was something I trained my SCs to do, right? Like saying no to the next meeting that the sales director wants to have, but it's not qualified and it's not with the right person, and we didn't get a good discovery first. Like, that is the same kind of constructive saying no, where the no is actually the right thing for the business. And I think I didn't realize that is the skill set I was applying until right now. But that's what it is, right? I mean, if you're an executive, your job is to take the scope of the people that you have and the business and the things that need to happen within the business, and use your people the most effective way, in a way that like also teams with your peers, right? And so if I just say yes to stuff, our output's not going to be good. I'm going to burn my team out. I'm going to have attrition within my org that is going to leave us in a worse place than if I just ruthlessly edited, right? That's what being an executive is. It's ruthlessly editing, where the team is the entire company, right? Like you're not I think at that point, if you're only thinking about your function, you're doing it wrong. Like, I need to ruthlessly edit in a way that supports product and supports sales and supports marketing's goals. And so I just got to a point where, I started to feel very comfortable with how I had assessed what our priorities were, how I had laid them out to my team so that everybody knew this is what we're doing this quarter. So if somebody came to me and said, oh, I need you to do this other thing, it was like, well, but which of these things is going? We can't do all of them. That is a recipe for not getting anything done well and burning people out. So if we need to make some trade-offs about what my plan was and what we move out to fit this thing in, great. But it came from a place of, I need to protect myself. I need to protect the team because that's how we do our best work. And like, once I got in my head around the, doing it that way, and really like, my job is to ruthlessly edit and make sure that the 3 things on our to-do list are like the things, and we hit them out of the park. It gets really easy then. They're uncomfortable conversations, but they're necessary conversations for the business.
Yeah. If they don't happen at your level, they won't happen anywhere.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Really helpful. So I guess, I know you've got Cece. Actually, we were going to record this earlier, and I think she was still in school. Has summer started for you guys?
Tomorrow is the last day of kindergarten, which is crazy.
Tomorrow's the last day.
Yesterday I picked her up. I tried to pick her up early from aftercare and take her swimming, and but they were having an ice cream party. She sent me away.
She said, "No, you're not taking me away from this ice cream. Get out of here. Come on, Mom."
We went swimming. I came back half an hour later and we went swimming. But yeah,
nice.
And I just I'm enjoying the balance right now. So I left Medallia in February. I think, knock on wood, I have not referred to Medallia as we a single time on this call, which is amazing.
I think I did a few times, but that's okay. It still feels like I'm part of the team.
It's okay if we're talking about us in 2015. Then it's you and me.
Okay.
But and so I'm just I'm in this beautiful place where I've got a little bit of balance, and I'm resting, and I'm I've been doing some consulting. I'm doing some advisory stuff. Specifically, I'm starting to sign up a few clients who need me to help them with Forrester Waves, Gartner MQs, or they're like earlier stage and they're trying to figure out, how do we build like an analyst practice? So I'm helping them sort of set plans that they can run with over the year. And it's really fun because it gives me the ability to, like, some days when I don't have a 4:00 meeting, attempt to convince
go swim. Yeah. Well, a couple questions. One, how do folks get a hold of you if they want to chat with you on one of those topics? What's the right way for them to reach out?
They should find me on LinkedIn for sure. I love connecting with people there. If they're interested in analyst relations specifically, do have a brand, Upright AR, as in up and to the right. So uprightar.com. You can find all the analyst relations stuff there.
Awesome. And then I think, you mentioned this too, right? You somewhere in the middle of that chaotic but up and to the right career, you had a child, like, had maternity. Was that a moment for you where you got to like find yourself, or was that further, like, even more like chaos that got added to the mix? Like, I know we've had folks ask us this too. Like, I know, I've got 4 kids, totally different for me as a father than as a mother, but like, those are seminal moments one way or the other for most folks that I'm close with, where it's either a moment of like grounding or just mass confusion. So curious how you think that played into your career.
It was all of that.
Probably all of that.
Looking back, incredibly grounding, right? Like, because that is my first step into having some kind of an identity that is not just I do stuff at work and I do it really well, right? So glad I had her. It was a hard, we thought a lot about, like, we had two big careers, great life. We're like, do we really want to mess this up? Like, we got a good thing going. But in retrospect, I'm so grateful that I have her. Not personally, of course, but also professionally. I feel like there's something, like, having a kid is just, it's a moment where, like, you relate on a human level, as a seller, as a marketer, as a person who's trying to connect with other humans. There's nothing more human than, like, asking someone, what's your kid into right now? And, like, connecting over. My kid came home yesterday at school. They watched Peppa Pig yesterday, which I think the teachers are phoning it in. Last day
of school. They are. They're hungover too.
So it's just, that's, there is something, like, I feel like professionally, I got a huge edge from motherhood, and I in no way expected that. But you hear people talk about, like, I got so much more efficient. The era of at least learning some no starts there, because you got to, nobody's picking your kid up but you. And so, I started to learn to have boundaries. But I also I feel like, having her in my life was just like a huge way to connect with humans. I hadn't anticipated, like, the professional benefits of that.
Are there things you would take from, the stuff we've talked about today, and that, you fast forward whatever, 15, 20 years. She's starting her career. Elements of the yes and the no. Like, how would you boil that down
I
for
think
her?
so much about this. Like, how do I could I help her short circuit the 20 years of like really hard no or really hard era of yes that I went through? And I talk about this with friends because I think all like this generation of parents is trying to raise kids who understand their place in the world, are good neighbors, are like empathetic and are thoughtful about what makes a good life, not just like what's the next thing I'm supposed to be achieving, but like how do I think about a life that's going to support all the different things I want to be doing over the course of my life. And so I really want to be intentional about that. At the same time, I don't think I get to hear unless I have 15 years of saying yes and
Yeah, the
growing.
journey's the destination sometimes.
Yeah, so I don't know if somebody figures out the answer to this, like, please let me know. I talk a lot about when I have a meeting late at night, like the balance that I had during the day, or when I try to model asking for things I need and having boundaries that make sense and that protect me, and teach some of the harder learned lessons that I got over the course of my life. But I think you can't short circuit the work. You can't, there's no way to do that. And so I've come to believe there's sort of an era for yes and an era for no in your life. And I'm really glad. I was struck listening to Brandon's version of this podcast by like how intentional he was about and methodical about every step of his life. For me, I'm like a bloom where you're planted person. I know what kinds of environments work well for me and what kinds of environments don't work well for me. I've learned more about that over the course of my life, but I've never been the type of person who like has a checklist and is working through the checklist. I've hired a lot of those people. They're wonderful people. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not who I am. And so I'm trying to teach my kid how to think about her own checklist, right? Where are the environments I love to be in? What gives me energy? What doesn't? And maybe if she can lean into some of those things, she might at least be able to stand up for herself sooner than I was able to.
I love that. Yeah, and hopefully good nuggets for folks. I know I think about it all the time too. Like, what are the things that I want my kids to hopefully learn the easy way? I'm sure. By the way, I'm sure every mistake I've ever made in my life, my parents told me, like, gave me great advice on not doing. So some of the stuff, kids just, I don't know, I did at least, got to touch the hot stove and be like, damn, that was hot.
That's right. Here's one thing I'm doing. I forget where I read about this, but apparently, who knows if this is even scientifically true. Apparently, children from the age of like 14 to 24 are just biologically designed to think you are the stupidest person on earth as their parent, right? Because
I think all my kids must be 14 then.
Yes, I think it's true. I'm telling her that now, and we'll see if it. I'll report back when she's 14. But I'm like, hey, just so you know, like biologically.
You're going to think I'm dumb for these years.
And I use it as sort of a like, you should listen to me now, right? You're not 14. So like, how about you just give me my time? And then from the time you're 14 to 24, I know you're going to think I'm an idiot, but when you're 24, you're going to come back.
We're going to come back. Right. We're going to revisit. And you're like, and I will have kept score and we will look at these notebooks side by side. Well, Elena, thank you. This is a blast. You're a great guest. You've had an awesome career. Hopefully there's folks out there that are thinking, gosh, I'd love to have her help on some of this AR stuff I'm struggling with. We told them how to get a hold of you. We'll put that in the comments here too. Last thing before we let you ride off into the sunset, we talk a lot. One of our kind of core ethos, values for Budburst is giving back. And so for all our guests, we want to highlight either a charity or a nonprofit that they're passionate about, and then we make a small donation in their name. So is there a cause or a charity you want to highlight here for our audience?
Let me take this venue to talk about Black Girl Ventures, which is an organization I got involved with while I was at Medallia. They help Black and brown female identifying founders hone their pitches. They do pitch competitions. They help them fundraise. If you're in sort of the broader tech community, you can get involved by, certainly they need donations and that's great, but you can also help like judge pitches, coach pitches. If you do anything related to go-to-market and if you watch Shark Tank and you get kind of into that process, it is amazing to work with these women and help them kind of hone parts of their pitches. So I've been really lucky to get involved with that. And thanks for the support of that org. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's really cool. We'll link to that in the comments as well. And Elena, thank you again for your time. We appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much. This was so fun.